5 years. 5 long years of silence. That's how long my son, Lawrence, and his wife, Rochelle, had gone without a single word to me. And then one day, just as I was finishing my breakfast, my phone buzzed. It was Lawrence. But before that buzz, before my entire world was turned upside down, you need to understand what my life was. You need to understand the quiet. My name is Carol Barnes. I'm 69 years old, and I'm a widow. My husband, Willard, passed on 7 years ago, and the silence that settled over this house afterward never really left. I live in Carmel, California. It sounds impressive, I know, but this is not the Carmel of the rich and famous. This is a small, 2-bedroom house Willard and I bought in the 80s, back when a history professor and his wife could still afford a mortgage in this town. It's paid off, thank goodness. Willard was always a sensible man. My days were all pretty much the same. I'd get up, my knees would ache a little, and I'd go to the kitchen to make my coffee. The loudest sound in the house was the kettle whistling. I'd sit at my small kitchen table and look out at the fog rolling in, and I would just listen. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hall clock, the emptiness. It's a strange thing, being lonely. It's not just about being alone. It's a cold, heavy feeling. I'd go to the grocery store, and the young cashiers would look right through me, their hands flying over the scanner, never making eye contact. I felt invisible, a polite, gray-haired old woman just taking up space. And this house, it was too big for one person. It wasn't just empty of people, it was full of things. Willard's things. My husband, God rest his soul, was a collector. He adored art, or at least what he considered art. He'd spend his weekends at dusty estate sales or driving hours to some rundown antique shop. He'd come home grinning, holding a big, dark painting of a gloomy-looking man or a ship on a stormy sea. The frames were always heavy and chipped. Our son, Lawrence, never got it. Back when he and Rochelle still visited, he'd walk in, sigh, and shake his head. "Dad, when are you going to stop buying all this old junk?" he'd ask. That word, junk. It always stung Willard, but he'd just chuckle. "It's not junk, son," he'd say. "It's history. These are forgotten stories." But to Lawrence, and especially to his wife, Rochelle, it was just junk. Embarrassing even. After Willard died, the collection just stayed. The paintings were on every wall, stacked 3 deep in the hallways. They leaned against the guest room bed that no one ever slept in. They were Willard's passion, his joy. But to me, alone in this silent house, they were becoming a burden. Every time I dusted one of those heavy frames, I didn't feel joy. I just felt the loss all over again. They were reminders of Willard, and they were reminders of Lawrence and the junk comment that hung in the air even 5 years later. I woke up one Tuesday morning. The silence was just suffocating. I looked at that big painting of the stormy sea in the dining room, and I just decided I was done. I'm 69, not dead. I refused to spend the last chapter of my life as a live-in curator for a house full of dusty memories. I was going to sell this house. I was going to downsize. I'd get a small, bright condo, maybe one of those new builds with a community pool. Something manageable. Something quiet in a good way, not a sad way. But first, I had to deal with the collection. My first thought was Lawrence. But I knew deep down he didn't want it. He'd probably just hire one of those 1-800 junk guys to haul it all to the dump. The thought of Willard's forgotten stories ending up in a landfill made me sick. I wanted them to go somewhere useful. I remembered Willard mentioning the local university's art department. I thought, well, maybe a student could use them. It seemed like a fitting, humble end. Maybe they could use the canvases for a project or practice restoring the chipped frames. So I found the number for the art history department. My fingers trembled just a little as I dialed, not from fear, but from relief. I was finally moving. I was taking control. A young woman answered, sounding busy. Hello, I said, my voice sounding small. My name is Carol Barnes. My late husband. He collected quite a lot of old paintings. I'm moving, and I was wondering if your department or perhaps a student would be interested in taking them. Otherwise, I'm afraid they're just going to be thrown out. She took my name and number and said she'd have someone call me back. When I hung up the phone, the house already felt a little lighter. I had no idea that simple little phone call was about to change everything. I sat back down at my kitchen table, the silence of the house settling back in. I'd done it. I'd made the call. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't guilt over giving away my late husband's prized possessions. It was relief, a deep, weary relief, like I'd finally set down a suitcase I'd been carrying for 7 long years. I was waiting for the university to call me back. And as I sat there, my mind drifted to why. Why was it so easy to let go of Willard's collection? The answer, if I'm being honest with myself, had a name: Rochelle, my daughter-in-law. I can still see it as clearly as if it were yesterday, that last Sunday dinner 5 years ago. Willard had been gone for 2 years. Lawrence and Rochelle, who was pregnant at the time, were visiting. Lawrence was mostly quiet, just tapping away on his phone. But Rochelle, she was different. She had a restless energy. She kept looking around the living room at the paintings on the wall, and her top lip would curl just a little. Finally, she stood up and walked right over to Willard's favorite piece. It was a large, dark painting of a ship on a stormy sea. She didn't just look at it. She sneered at it. "When are you going to get rid of all this junk, Lawrence?" she asked. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was quiet, filled with complete disdain. "It's embarrassing. What if one of your partners from the firm came over? It makes the whole house look so old. Junk." My breath caught in my throat. I looked at Lawrence. I waited for my son to say something, anything, to defend his father's memory, to say, "Rochelle, that was Dad's favorite," or even just, "Be nice, honey." He didn't even look up from his phone. He just gave a little shrug. "We'll talk about it later, Rochelle," he mumbled. And that was it. In that moment, I realized that my late husband's entire passion, his life's joy, was just an embarrassment to my son and his wife. It wasn't just the painting. I was the junk. I was the old house. I was the past they wanted to get rid of. That awful dinner wasn't the beginning of the silence, though. It was just the moment the door was finally nailed shut. The distance had been growing for a while like a slow, creeping vine. When Willard was alive, they came for dinner every single Sunday. It was loud, full of laughter, and Willard would tell his stories. After he passed, it became every other Sunday. Then once a month. The excuses were always so reasonable, so polite. "Lawrence has a huge project at work, Mom. He's just exhausted. We're going to Napa for the weekend with friends. You understand, right?" And I, not wanting to be a bother, not wanting to be that clinging, nagging mother-in-law you always hear about, I'd just say, "Of course, dear. Have a wonderful time." I'd hang up the phone and look at the 2 thick pork chops I'd taken out of the freezer, and I'd sigh, and I'd wrap one back up and put it away. Then my grandson, Leo, was born. Oh, I was over the moon. I was finally going to be a grandmother. I knitted 3 blankets. I bought Goodnight Moon and the Velveteen Rabbit. I was going to be Grandma Carol. I drove to the hospital, my heart just bursting. But when I got there, the room was tense. Rochelle was holding the baby like a precious, fragile diamond. When I reached out my arms, she physically flinched. "He needs to sleep, Carol," she said, her voice sharp. "We're on a very strict schedule." The visits after that were, well, they were awful. They were scheduled, like a business meeting. I had to text first. I wasn't allowed to just pop by. When I was there, Rochelle would watch me like a hawk. Did you use the hand sanitizer? Please don't kiss his head, Carol. The germs. We're not doing it that way. The book says to hold him like this. It wasn't about the baby's health. I understood that. It was about control. I was a problem to be managed. I was the old, outdated mother-in-law who didn't understand her modern world. After that junk comment at dinner, the calls and texts just faded away. I'd text them, thinking of you. Hope Leo is doing well. A week would pass. I'd get a one-word reply. Fine. Then nothing. My calls went to voicemail. My birthday card was met with silence. Christmas came and went. I sent Leo a $50 bill for his birthday every year. I never got a thank you. I have no idea if he ever even saw them. I was ghosted. It's a terrible, hollow feeling. You ask yourself 1,000 times, what did I do wrong? You go over every conversation. Was it something I said? Was I too pushy? Was I not helpful enough? But after 5 years, you stop asking. You just accept. The silence becomes your new normal. I looked at the cold coffee in my cup. The phone on the wall was just as silent as it had been for half a decade. And I looked at that painting of the stormy sea. Rochelle called it junk. Lawrence let her. And then they left me alone with it. Fine, I whispered to the empty room. Let it all be junk. I wasn't just downsizing my house. I was clearing out the wreckage of a relationship. I was finally, after all these years, taking their side. It was junk, and I wanted it gone. I hoped the university would call back soon. I only had to wait about 2 hours. I was washing my coffee cup when the phone rang. The sound of it made me jump. It rang so rarely. I dried my hands and picked up the receiver. Hello, Mrs. Carol Barnes. The voice was a man's, deep and polite. Definitely not a college student. Yes, this is she. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I'm the chief curator at the Carmel Museum of Art. Your call to the university was forwarded to my office. You mentioned you have a collection from your late husband. A museum? Oh, goodness. I felt a wave of embarrassment. I was probably wasting this important man's time. Oh, Dr. Thorne, I'm so sorry to bother you. I stammered. I really just thought, well, that some students might be able to use the canvases or the frames. It's a lot of old paintings. I'm downsizing. There was a pause. Your husband, was he Professor Willard Barnes by any chance? I was surprised. Why, yes. Yes, he was. The man's tone warmed immediately. I thought so. I studied his work in graduate school. He was a brilliant historian. Mrs. Barnes, I would be honored to come and take a look at what he collected. Would this afternoon be too soon? Well, I couldn't very well say no to that. He arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. He was a kind-looking man, younger than I expected, maybe in his late 40s. He had those wire-rimmed glasses, just like Willard used to wear. Thank you for coming, I said, wringing my hands as I let him in. I'll make some coffee. No, thank you, he said, his eyes already scanning the living room. I'd love to just, if you don't mind. Of course. As I said, it's everywhere. I felt that flush of embarrassment again. I felt like I had to apologize. I'm sure it's mostly just old junk. I used her word, Rochelle's word. Dr. Thorne turned and looked at me, a serious but gentle expression on his face. Mrs. Barnes, in my line of work, I've learned that one person's junk is very often another person's history. Shall we? I nodded, and I just followed him. He started with the big, stormy sea painting in the dining room, the one Rochelle had sneered at. He didn't sneer. He stopped about 3 feet away from it and just stared. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he took a small magnifying glass and a little flashlight from his satchel. He leaned in inches from the canvas, looking at the corner where the artist's signature was half hidden. "My goodness," he whispered. He moved to the next painting in the hall, and the next. For nearly an hour, I was just a shadow in my own home. He was silent, focused, and I saw a change come over him. He went from being a polite man doing a favor for a professor's widow to something else. He was electrified. He was taking quick, scribbled notes in a little black book. He'd walk up close, then stand back, then lean in again. He finally came back to the living room, but he didn't sit down. He just looked at me, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Mrs. Barnes." "Carol. May I call you Carol?" "Please," I whispered. "Carol," he said, taking a deep breath. "This is not a student project. This is not junk." I just looked at him, confused. What do you mean?" "Your husband, he wasn't just buying paintings. He was rediscovering them. What you have here, this is a significant, and I mean highly significant, gathering of works from a lost school of American artists." He pointed to the stormy sea. "This artist, we thought all his work was destroyed in a fire in 1912. Art historians have been writing about his lost period for 50 years, and it's hanging in your dining room." He explained that Willard hadn't just been collecting. He'd been curating. He'd found a thread, a connection between these forgotten painters, and he'd followed it for decades. He'd been reassembling a piece of art history that everyone else had given up on. My head was spinning. All I could hear was Rochelle's voice. "Embarrassing, Dr. Thorne," I said, my voice shaky. I'm a 69-year-old widow. I don't understand these things. What are you telling me?" He finally sat down on the sofa, like the news was too heavy to deliver standing up. He looked at his little notebook, then back at me. "Carol, my museum would, of course, need to conduct a formal appraisal. But based on my knowledge, based on recent auction sales for single works from this period." He paused, and I held my breath. "A very conservative estimate for this entire collection is $5 million. The words just hung in the air. $5 million. The room was silent, but my ears were ringing. I had to sit down. My knees just gave out. And the first thing I felt wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. I didn't think about a new condo or a vacation. My hand went to my chest, and a sob just broke out of me. It was for Willard. He knew. I whispered, the tears running down my face. He knew it wasn't junk. All those years when we were scraping by on his salary, he knew. Dr. Thorne nodded softly. He knew. He had an eye, a gift. He wasn't just a professor, Carol. He was a visionary. He preserved something priceless. I sat there crying in my quiet little house, surrounded by $5 million worth of junk. And all I could think was, "Oh, Willard, you were right. You were right all along." Dr. Thorne was so gentle. He saw I was in shock, and he went to the kitchen and got me a glass of water himself. He sat with me for a few minutes while I just cried. I cried for Willard, for his quiet, secret victory. I cried for all the years he'd been called an eccentric, just a dusty old professor. He was a visionary, Dr. Thorne said again, his voice full of respect. "And Carol, we cannot let this vision stay hidden for one more day. The world needs to see what he did." Things moved. Well, fast isn't the word. It was like a whirlwind. Dr. Thorne and the museum board were beyond thrilled. They didn't just want to accept the collection as a donation. They wanted to feature it. They started using words like gala and opening night. Dr. Thorne explained they were fast-tracking a major exhibition. "This isn't just a local story, Carol," he said, his eyes bright. "This is a national one." A few days later, They sent a nice young woman to the house with a very big, very professional camera. I was so flustered. I didn't know what to wear. I just put on my good blue blouse, the one I save for holidays, and I sat on my sofa. I felt so silly. Just smile naturally, Mrs. Barnes, she said. I'm sure I looked like a startled owl. She had me stand next to the big, stormy sea painting. I put my hand on the frame, Willard's frame, and tried to look dignified, as she put it. Then, about a week after Dr. Thorne's first visit, he called me. Carol, I just want to prepare you, he said. The press release is going live this afternoon. We're posting it on our website and social media channels at 2 o'clock. Oh, dear, I said. Is that a big deal? He chuckled. It might be. The title of the article is Local Museum Announces $5 Million Hidden Collection of Lost American Masters Discovered in Widow's Carmel Home. $5 million. I said, practicing the number. It still sounded like something from a game show, not something sitting in my hallway. At 2:15, my phone rang. It was the landline, the one that sat on my kitchen wall, the one that only ever rang with telemarketers trying to sell me walk-in bathtubs. I picked it up. Mrs. Barnes, a man's voice asked, quick and sharp. This is Bill Jensen from the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm calling about this art collection. Is it true you were just going to give it away? I was so taken aback. I just stammered, well, I was downsizing. Before I could even finish my sentence, he was asking me about Lawrence. The museum release says you have one son. What does he think of this discovery? I mumbled something about being out of touch and hung up as politely as I could. My heart was pounding. The phone rang again. Instantly. This time it was a woman with a sharp New York accent. Carol, darling, this is Monica Hale from Art World magazine. We are desperate to know the provenance of the collection. We're hearing rumors. We need to be the first to. I didn't even know what provenance meant. And then it just didn't stop. It rang and it rang and it rang. It was a sound my house hadn't heard in years. And frankly, it was terrifying. The museum's post, that little article on the internet, had gone viral. That's the word they used. It was everywhere. People were sharing the picture of me, the startled owl in the blue blouse. I felt like a little rowboat caught in a shipping lane. These people, journalists, art critics, even gallery owners from Los Angeles, they all wanted to talk to me. They wanted to know everything. What was Willard like? What did I eat for breakfast? Did I know I was living in a treasure chest? I felt a lot of things. I was so proud of Willard. My goodness, I was bursting with pride. His name was being spoken with such respect. He wasn't junk collector Willard. He was visionary Professor Barnes. But I was also deeply, deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't my accomplishment. I was just the lady who hadn't thrown it all in a dumpster. I was just Carol, a 69-year-old woman in a paid-off house who missed her husband. By 5 o'clock, I'd had enough. I'd taken 22 calls. I couldn't take another. I walked over to the kitchen wall, and I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I unplugged the phone jack. The silence that flooded the room was a relief. I sat at my kitchen table, in the quiet, watching the evening fog roll in. All those voices, all those strangers calling from all over the country, desperate to talk to me. And yet the one voice I'd spent 5 long years aching to hear, the voice of my son, Lawrence, that line remained just as silent as it had always been. I unplugged the landline. The sudden, total silence in the house was a blessing. The ringing had finally stopped. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands still trembling a little, and sat down at the kitchen table. I was trying to wrap my head around it all. Not just the calls, but the words, $5 million. I was, I suppose, a wealthy woman. It felt unreal. like a story I was reading about someone else. I was just starting to feel my heart rate return to normal when a different sound cut through the quiet. A buzz. It was on the counter, coming from my purse. My cell phone. I almost never used that phone. I kept it for emergencies, or for the rare times I was driving and needed to use one of those new map things. My heart, which had just calmed down, gave a painful jolt. No one texted me on that phone. I fumbled it out of my bag. The screen was lit up. One new text message. I put on my reading glasses, and my breath just stopped. The name on the screen was Lawrence. My son. I hadn't seen his name on a screen in 5 years. My hand was shaking so much I could barely tap the message to open it. I had to set the phone down on the table and lean over it to read. Hey, Mom. Just saw the news article online. Wow, that's incredible. Listen, Rochelle and I were thinking it's been way too long. We should really get dinner this week. Are you free? I read it once. Then I read it again. And a third time. Hey, Mom. Just like that. As if he'd just seen me last Sunday. Not 5 years of birthdays, of Christmases, of lonely Thanksgivings. Not 5 years of me wondering if my only son was alive or dead. Just saw the news article online. He said it. He just put it right out there. He didn't even try to hide it. He saw the news. He saw the $5 million. And now he was thinking. Rochelle and I were thinking. My blood ran cold. Rochelle, the woman who called my husband's life's work junk. The woman who found my home embarrassing. She was thinking. I could just picture it. Her eyes wide, her mind spinning, poking Lawrence in the side. You have to call your mother Lawrence. Now, it's been way too long. A hot, bitter anger rose in my throat. I wanted to throw the phone. I wanted to scream. Whose fault is that, Lawrence? This wasn't an apology. It wasn't an I miss you. It was an invoice. It was a business proposal. My father-in-law's junk was suddenly worth $5 million, and they wanted in. I stood up and walked to the sink, my heart hammering. What kind of person does this? Part of me, the angry, wounded part, wanted to text back. Wow, you're right. $5 million, is incredible. Or just, no, I wanted to ignore it. Just leave him in the silence he'd left me in for half a decade. That would be justice, wouldn't it? Let him wonder. Let him feel that awful, hollow ache of being ghosted. But I couldn't. Underneath that burning anger was something else. That deep, terrible, unconditional thing that they put in you when you become a mother. He was my son. He was a stranger. And he was a greedy, spineless man who let his wife poison him against his own mother. But he was still the little boy I'd taught to ride a bike. What was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to cut him out forever? Be just as cold and hard as he'd been? Or was I supposed to be the mother? I sat back down at the table. I looked at the phone. I was so torn. I was afraid. If I said yes, was I just a fool? A lonely old doormat. So desperate for a crumb of affection that I'd let them walk right back in just because of money? I thought about it for a long, long time. I wasn't going to gush. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I wouldn't let him think for 1 second that all was forgiven. But I had to know. I had to see his face when he said it. I picked up the phone. My thumbs felt thick and clumsy. I typed deleted and typed again. I kept it simple. I kept it polite. I kept all the pain and anger and 5 years of tears tucked safely away. Hello, Lawrence. Yes, I am free for dinner. I hit send. The little message turned blue, and I sat there in the quiet of my house staring at the screen, and I was terrified. The phone buzzed in my hand almost immediately. I flinched. It was Lawrence. Great, Mom. How about Friday, 7 p.m.? We'll meet at Il Vecchio in Palo Alto. Palo Alto, of course. Not Carmel. Not my home, where I had pictures of him as a little boy. Not even halfway, at some simple diner off the highway. No, I would have to drive over an hour, all the way to their town, their world. Palo Alto, the land of tech billionaires, and my son, the successful lawyer. I'd heard of Il Vecchio. It was one of those places you read about where a simple plate of pasta costs more than my weekly grocery bill. I knew, right then, this wasn't a family reunion. This was a business meeting. They were setting the terms. I was being summoned. I texted back a simple, "Fine." The next 2 days were dreadful. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just walked around the house, looking at Willard's paintings. The junk. The $5 million junk. I kept asking myself what I was doing. Was I a fool? Was I walking into an ambush? On Friday, I must have tried on 5 different outfits. Everything in my closet felt old and wrong. I finally settled on a pair of simple black slacks and the same blue blouse I'd worn for the museum photograph. I put on a little lipstick. I looked in the mirror and saw a 69-year-old woman who looked tired and scared. My heart was racing the entire drive. The traffic was terrible. My old car felt so small and loud next to all the shiny, silent, expensive electric cars on the freeway. By the time I found the restaurant and paid a ridiculous amount to park in a garage, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. I walked in. The restaurant was a lot. It was loud, dark, and full of beautiful, young people laughing and clinking glasses. I felt like I'd wandered into the wrong building. I stood by the door, feeling invisible, until a hostess looked through me. "Can I help you?" I'm meeting my son, Lawrence Barnes." Her face changed. "Oh, Mr. Barnes. Right this way." Of course. Mr. Barnes was a regular. She led me to a plush booth in the back. And there they were. 5 years. Lawrence stood up. He looked older. He had gray at his temples, just like his father used to. But he was thinner, and he looked tired. Rochelle stood up too. She looked exactly the same. Perfect, stylish, not a hair out of place. Her black dress probably cost more than my car. "Mom." Lawrence came and gave me a hug. It was awful. It was stiff and quick, like hugging a lamppost. "You look great." "Really?" "Hello, Lawrence." "Rochelle." Rochelle didn't move to hug me. She just smiled, a tight, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Carol, it's really been a long time." We all sat down. The awkwardness was a physical thing. It was a heavy blanket in the air. A waiter instantly appeared with water. Lawrence cleared his throat, trying to smile. "So, wow," he said, leaning forward on his elbows. "Mom, this whole thing, it's just incredible. I mean, $5 million. We couldn't believe it. Who would have ever guessed?" "We were just floored, Carol," Rochelle chimed in, her voice light and breezy. "We saw the article online. I mean, all that stuff, we were just so caught off guard. It's amazing. All that stuff. There it was. Not Dad's collection. Not Willard's art. Just stuff. The same word as junk, just polished up for a $50 a plate restaurant. They kept talking. They were excited. They were nervous. They talked about the museum, about the newspapers, about how proud they were of Dad's hobby. They asked me what Dr. Thorne was like. They asked if I'd talked to a lawyer, an accountant. And then Rochelle, trying to smooth over the giant, gaping hole of 5 years, just waved her hand dismissively. "Well, it's such a shame about the long absence," she said, as if she were talking about bad weather. "But you know how life gets. It just gets so busy. We should just Let's just order, shall we? Let's talk about something more cheerful. That was it. A long absence. Like it was a casual oversight. Like it was a missed dentist appointment. Not 5 years of my life. Not 5 birthdays for her son, my grandson. Not 5 lonely Thanksgivings. Not 5 Christmases where I sat alone in a quiet house, wondering if my son was even alive. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the times I felt invisible, it all just rose up in my throat. I felt a sudden, cold calm. I thought of Rochelle's voice 5 years ago in my house. It's embarrassing. I put my hands flat on the white tablecloth. The clinking and the laughter of the restaurant just faded away. Lawrence and Rochelle stopped talking. They were looking at me. My voice, when it came out, wasn't a shout. It was quiet. It was steady. And it cut right through the noise. I looked right past Rochelle. I looked right into my son's eyes, the ones he got from his father. Why did it take a $5 million collection for you to text me, Lawrence? Rochelle's mouth fell open. Lawrence, he just froze. His face went pale. I wasn't finished. Where have you been all these years? The smiles were gone. The fake, breezy chatter stopped. The silence at our table was finally real. It was terrible, and it was tense, but for the first time in 5 years, it was honest. The air at the table was so thick I could barely breathe. Rochelle's face, which had been all fake smiles, turned to stone. She was furious. Carol, she said, her voice dropping to a cold, sharp whisper. That is incredibly unfair. We are here, aren't we? We're trying to reconnect. We're trying to celebrate this wonderful news for you. And you're attacking us. Rochelle, please. Lawrence started, but she cut him off, her eyes fixed on me. No, Lawrence, this isn't fair. You have no idea how much pressure he's been under at the firm, how busy our lives are. I have always just been looking out for my family, for Lawrence, for Leo. That is all I have ever done. Is that what this is? I asked, my voice still quiet. Looking out for your family? By erasing me from it? By calling my husband's life's work junk? Rochelle gasped, as if I'd slapped her. But Lawrence just broke. He put his face in his hands. He just covered his face, and his shoulders started to shake. Rochelle, he said, his voice muffled. Just stop, please. Just stop talking. She stared at him, her mouth open, speechless for the first time. Lawrence slowly lowered his hands. He looked up at me, and his eyes were his father's, and they were full of tears. You're right, Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. You're right. He took a shaky breath. I was a coward. That's the truth. I was a total coward. Rochelle tried again. Lawrence, don't. No. His voice was suddenly loud, and he slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses jump. The tables nearby went quiet. No, she deserves the truth. He turned back to me, and the tears were just running down his face. I let it happen. I let her attitude. I let it all just happen. When she said that about Dad's paintings in your house, I should have said something. I know I should have. And I didn't. I didn't. He wiped his face with his napkin, not caring who saw. And after that, it got easier to not call. It got easier to just live in her world, the new, shiny world. And you were the old one, the embarrassing one. And I let it happen. He was sobbing now, right there in that fancy restaurant. It was easier to please her, Mom. It was easier to avoid the fight than to do the right thing. And then a year went by, and then 2. And then, how do you even make that call? How do you call after 3 years and say, "I'm sorry I've been a terrible son. So, I didn't," he choked out. "I let it go. I let you go. And then I saw that article. I saw the $5 million. And I saw your picture. And it was like a punch to the stomach. What have I done? What kind of man am I?" He looked me right in the eye. "The money, yes, Mom. The money is what made me text. It was the shock. It was the excuse to finally break the silence. But seeing your face, Mom, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. For everything." He just wept. My son, the restaurant, the people, Rochelle, it all just faded away. I took a deep breath. I felt calm. All the anger, the 5 years of hurt, it felt heard. I looked at Lawrence, my son, crying over his $50 plate of food. Then I looked at Rochelle, who was white with fury, her arms crossed, looking at her husband like he was a traitor. "Thank you, Lawrence," I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. That was the truth. And that's all I've wanted for 5 years. I turned to Rochelle. "And you say you were looking out for your family. But I was also your family, Rochelle. You don't just throw family away because they're not new or rich or modern enough for you. Family isn't supposed to come with a price tag." Rochelle just glared at me. I looked back at Lawrence. He had stopped crying, but his face was a wreck. He was looking at me with this desperate, hopeful look, like a little boy. "I hear your apology, Lawrence," I said softly. "And the mother in me, the part of me that is and always will be your mother, accepts it." He let out a breath. "Oh, Mom." I held up my hand. "But it's not that simple." His face fell. You can't erase 5 years with one dinner. You broke something. You broke me a little. You broke my trust. And I'm sorry, even a real one, it doesn't just fix that. It's a start. But it's just a start." I picked up my purse from the booth seat. "I am willing to work on this," I said, looking at them both. "I am willing to see if we can find a way back. But it will not be like it was, and it will not be on your terms." I stood up. "My trust, that's not something you just get back because you're sorry. It has to be earned. Slowly and honestly. No more being busy. No more looking out for the family. Just honesty. Do you understand?" Lawrence, his face stained with tears, just nodded. "Yes, Mom. Okay. Honesty. I can do that. I will." Rochelle said nothing. She just stared at the table. "Good," I said. I looked around the restaurant. "Well, I'm not very hungry anymore. Thank you for the invitation." And I turned. I didn't wait for them to stand. I didn't say goodbye again. I walked away. I walked out of that dark, loud restaurant back into the cool night air. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The drive home from Palo Alto was long, but I didn't feel tired. I felt clear. I walked into my quiet house. And the first thing I did was plug the landline phone back into the wall. I didn't know if he would call. I didn't know if I wanted him to, but I knew I'd had my say. The ball was in his court. A week went by, an entire week of silence. The old, familiar loneliness started to creep back in. I began to second-guess myself. Had I been too hard? Should I have stayed, listened more, maybe given him a hug? I was his mother, after all. But then I'd remember Rochelle's face, cold and angry, and I'd know I'd done the right thing. I'd set my boundary. Now, I had to wait. Then, on Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the dinner, the phone rang. The landline. My hand flew to my chest. I let it ring twice more before picking up. "Hello, Mom." It was Lawrence. His voice was small. not the confident lawyer from the restaurant. He sounded hesitant. "Hello, Lawrence," I said, keeping my own voice level. There was a long, awkward pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. I was wondering if maybe I could come by tomorrow. Just me, he said, rushing the last part. "Rochelle, she's taking Leo to a friend's birthday party. So, I'd be alone." Just him. That one phrase meant everything. He wasn't asking permission. He was telling me he was making a choice. "Yes, Lawrence," I said. "That would be fine." "What time?" "Around noon." "I'll see you then." I hung up the phone. I spent all Saturday morning in a state. I was so nervous. I vacuumed the living room. I wiped down the counters. I caught myself wondering if I should bake something like I used to when he was a boy. I stopped myself. No, this wasn't that. This was something new. At noon on the dot, his car pulled up. Not his fancy work car, but an older, sensible sedan. He walked up the path, and I opened the door before he could knock. He stood on the doormat. He looked terrible. He was wearing an old polo shirt, and he hadn't shaved in a day or two. He looked like a son, not a stranger. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Lawrence. Come in." It was awful. Just painfully, terribly awkward. He stepped inside, into the hallway, and just stood there, his hands in his pockets. He was a 40-something-year-old man, a successful lawyer, and he looked like a 16-year-old boy who'd just been caught sneaking in past curfew. I didn't know what to do. Do I hug him? Do I offer him coffee? We can sit in the living room." I said. "Yeah, okay." We sat. Him on the edge of the sofa, me in Willard's old armchair. The silence in the room was deafening. It wasn't the lonely silence I was used to. It was a fragile, ticking silence, like we were both afraid the wrong word would shatter everything. He kept looking down at his hands, then at the floor, then at his knees. He wouldn't look at the paintings. He wouldn't look at me. I waited. I knew this was on him. I'd done all the talking I was going to do. He cleared his throat. He looked around, his eyes finally landing on the big, stormy sea painting, the one Rochelle hated, the one that had been the center of so much pain. He just stared at it for a long, long time. He turned his head just slightly and looked at me. His eyes were red. "Dad really loved this stuff, didn't he?" he asked. His voice was quiet. He didn't call it junk. He didn't call it a collection. Just stuff. His father's stuff. And I looked at my son. Not the man who'd been missing for 5 years. Not the stranger from the restaurant. I saw Lawrence, my boy, and the wall of ice around my heart, it didn't melt, but a small, tiny crack appeared. A little, sad smile touched my lips. "Yes," I said. My voice was just as quiet as his. He did. He really did. That was it. That was all we said about it. But it was enough. The tension in the room, it eased. Just a little. He stayed for another 20 minutes. We talked about nothing, about the fog in Carmel, about how the grocery store had changed. He asked about my car. I took a breath. I asked about Leo. He said he's good. He's big. He fumbled for his phone and showed me a picture. A little boy with my eyes and Willard's chin. My heart ached, but I just nodded. "He's a beautiful boy, Lawrence." When it was time to go, he stood at the door again. "Well, okay," he said. "Okay," I replied. He put his hand on the doorknob. Then he stopped. He turned back. I'll call again soon, Mom. If that's okay." I looked at my son. "That would be okay, Lawrence." He gave me a small, broken-looking smile. And he left. I closed the door, and I leaned against it. I didn't cry. I didn't feel happy. I felt tired, But it wasn't the bad, lonely tired. It was just tired. It was a start. It was the first real clumsy step on a very, very long bridge. That first stiff visit with Lawrence, that was 6 months ago. He kept his word. Honesty, he promised, and he was trying. He kept his promise. The calls came. At first, it was maybe once every 2 weeks, then once a week. They were always a little awkward. We were like two strangers learning a new dance, terrified of stepping on each other's toes. We didn't talk about the bad years. We didn't talk about the restaurant. We just talked. He'd tell me about a big case he was working on. I told him about the tomato plants in my garden. He asked for my opinion on a new car he was thinking of buying. Simple things. Small things. But they were honest. Rochelle. Well, Rochelle was Rochelle. There was no tearful phone call. No letter of apology. I knew I would never get one. And I realized I didn't need one. But she was making an effort in her own way. On my 70th birthday, a delivery truck pulled up. It was a huge, magnificent white orchid in a pot that must have cost a fortune. The little card didn't say, "I'm sorry." It just said, "Happy birthday, Carol, R." It was an orchid of truce. I accepted it. The real change, the one that mattered, came about 3 months ago. Lawrence called, and his voice was different. He was nervous. "Mom," he said, "Leo, my son, Leo, he has a soccer game on Saturday. At the park. It's nothing fancy, but I was wondering if you'd want to come." My breath caught. My grandson, the boy I'd only seen in pictures. "Yes, Lawrence," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I would like that very much." I went. I sat on the metal bleachers, a little way back from the other parents. I saw Rochelle there at the far end, clapping and shouting. We saw each other. We didn't wave. We just nodded, a small, polite acknowledgement. It was enough. And I watched my grandson. He was 7 years old, and he had Willard's chin, and he ran so fast. My heart, I thought it would just burst. After the game, Lawrence walked over, holding his hand. "Leo," Lawrence said, his voice thick. This is your grandma, Carol." The little boy looked up at me, shy, hiding behind his father's leg. I got down on one knee right there on the grass, my bad knee complaining. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Leo," I whispered. He just looked at me, and then he gave me a tiny, shy smile. That was all, but it was everything. Then came the opening night at the museum, the Willard Barnes collection. Dr. Thorne had been sending me invitations and updates for months. I bought a new dress, a dark green velvet one. I felt different. I wasn't the scared, invisible woman in the blue blouse anymore. Lawrence called me. "Mom, would you want me to be your date for that? To the gala? What about Rochelle?" I asked. A pause. She said, "This night is for you and Dad. She's fine. She's staying with Leo." So my son, in a beautiful dark suit, picked me up. He held out his arm for me, and I took it. When we walked into that museum, there were cameras, flashes. People were clapping. Dr. Thorne came over and kissed my hand. And I wasn't scared. I smiled. Lawrence walked with me through the rooms, and I saw it. Willard's junk, hung on beautiful, clean white walls, lit by soft, warm lights. People were standing in front of them, whispering, reading the little plaques. And there, on its own wall, was the big, stormy sea painting. The plaque underneath said, "The Storm," widely considered the artist's masterpiece, thought lost for over a century. Lawrence squeezed my arm. He leaned in, his voice thick. He was really something, wasn't he, Mom? He whispered. I couldn't speak. I put my hand over his. I nodded, the tears finally coming. They weren't sad tears. They were for Willard. He was right. He was right all along. That was 2 months ago. I'm sitting in my garden now. The house is quiet, but it's not the lonely quiet anymore. It's just peaceful. I decided not to sell the house. Not yet. I like it here. The museum has the collection, but I kept one. I kept the storm. It's hanging in my living room. I look at it every day. My life isn't a perfect fairy tale. My relationship with Lawrence, it's a work in progress. It's still fragile. We're still rebuilding. Rochelle and we are polite. We can be in the same room for Leo's birthday. We will never be friends. And I've learned that's okay. That night in the restaurant, it changed everything. I look back on the woman I was, the lonely, invisible widow who was just going to give it all away. The money, that $5 million, it didn't save me. It didn't fix my family. It was just a catalyst. It was a loud noise that shattered the 5 years of silence and forced us to finally talk. The real legacy, the real inheritance Willard left me, it wasn't the money. It was finding my own voice. It was learning that I was allowed to be angry. I was allowed to be hurt. And I was allowed to set boundaries, even with my own son, especially with my own son. That's the real treasure. Learning to respect myself enough to demand honesty. This whole journey, it makes me wonder, have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? It's the hardest thing in the world, isn't it? But how did it change your relationship? I'd really love to read your stories. Let me know in the comments. And if my story, if it meant something to you, I hope you'll like it and maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories of second chances and of rebuilding what we thought was broken.